I'm specifically going to focus on candidate experience, and I'm going to exclude the part where actually TA speaks to the candidates directly, because they have an obvious influence on candidate experience in the recruiter screen. But actually, for the majority of the recruitment process, candidates actually deal with other stakeholders outside of TA, such as the hiring managers, and towards the end of the process, usually with human resources.
Good. Hello, everyone. Today I am with Alexander Oldewage, who has worked in different startups like Klarna and Adjust, and currently is the lead talent acquisition manager at HiveMQ. And I'm really excited to have you here today. We will be diving into the behind the scenes of the TA world, and I can't wait to hear your intake on this. But my first question, as always, is why do you think it's important for people to know what happens behind the scenes?
Well, firstly, thanks a lot for having me today, and thanks for introducing the topic. And this is just something that I think it's important to speak about, because there's a lot of I don't think a lot of candidates actually know what TA actually does, and there's probably people working in companies that don't actually know what TA does. So I think it might give some insight to people what TA actually does. Also, I think if you're new in talent acquisition, you might learn a trick or two of how you can influence certain things. But TA is sometimes seen as just kind of a function that pushes CVs through. So I think it's just interesting to speak about what we actually do.
Yeah, totally. I think when I first started, I literally had no idea what to expect of the job, and also like how much happens. Like obviously we all have applied to roles, and especially before working in TA, at least I did, and like once I started, there was so much that I had no idea about how crucial those things were. So, what do you think are like the main parts that TA has an influence on the candidate experience?
So I'm specifically going to focus on candidate experience, and I'm going to exclude the part where actually TA speaks to the candidates directly, because they have an obvious influence on candidate experience in the recruiter screen. But actually, for the majority of the recruitment process, candidates actually deal with other stakeholders outside of TA, such as the hiring managers, and towards the end of the process, usually with human resources. So I think basically your relationship with hiring managers is a very important part of how the interview process goes, and how the candidate experience goes. And what I think is important to start with is doing at least basic training for hiring managers. So I think in most of the companies that I worked for, there was at least a basic training that hiring managers had to do, and usually TA either hosted this or were heavily involved in this. So that's already a good start. Setting SLAs around feedback, because a lot of reasons for bad candidate experiences is not being quick enough with feedback, taking too long to get back to candidates. So things like setting SLAs with hiring managers or things that also come to mind. I also think that also clarifying feedback with hiring managers, because sometimes hiring managers give feedback that's not really that constructive, or you can't ideally. What I will start by saying is, these days TA gets so many applicants at early stages, so it's impossible to give very specific feedback at application stage or even at recruiter screen stage. But if a candidate at least spoke to a hiring manager or did any sort of task or invested any time, I think it's really important to also push back on hiring managers and get more specific feedback, and share this with candidates. So these are a few of the just very basic things that we can do. But beyond that, I think working in TA, you have, if you're in TA leadership, at least you have some influence about the tools that you use. So just stuff like the ATS could have a impact on candidate experience. So sorry, ATS is applicant tracking system for those people who's not working. Talent acquisition, things like making the first interview booking very simple, like using Calendly or anything simple to book interviews. Or what we recently started using here is meta view, which is kind of a note taker, and it already just not typing while speaking to the candidate already, I think also increases the candidate experience. So yeah, those are some of the things. And then towards the end of the process, I think the TA's relationship with HR is also very important. So staying close to HR, because most companies I work for, HR usually send out the contracts or the offers towards the end once the candidate passes the interview process. And also similarly, in companies where I worked before, we set SLAs, we had an agreement, we try and send out offers within 1 day, or we have some agreement in place to make sure that candidates don't wait and that the experience is smooth. And yeah, other than that, I also think, one other thing that I forgot to mention is when even reaching out to candidates for the initial interviews, making sure I helped create a lot of brochures with information about the company and the interview process so that they know what to expect and that they know what is upcoming. And yeah, I think just generally kind of managing expectations plays a massive role in candidate experience.
Yeah, just being transparent, really, right?
Yeah.
When you were saying all of those different stakeholders, I just, obviously it's my day today, it's your day today, but sometimes I think it's very easy to kind of overlook how many different stakeholders we actually have to deal with.
Yeah.
And how we're constantly between, either the candidate and the hiring manager, or between HR and the hiring manager, or between the different candidates as well, or the different interviewers, because if you're like doing the full end to end, then obviously you're kind of touching all those kind of different points throughout the process. So what would you say is like the biggest challenge that TAs face by trying to juggle all those different stakeholders?
Yeah, so I'll start off by saying you have to deal with the candidate's partners sometimes as well. When it gets to offer stage, they often have to speak to their partners.
Sure.
I jokingly sometimes offer to speak to candidates' wives if they want to help to accept the offer. But yeah,
That's a good point, actually. I should introduce that.
yeah, but yeah. So how do you how do you juggle the different stakeholders? And you have to have close relationships with, for me, hiring manager. I have call with hiring managers every week. If they are recruiting for a role, I make sure I have a weekly catch up. And I think it's also important throughout the process to speak about candidate experience, to create the urgency and keep reminding them of the scarcity of candidates. We are in a market where a lot of people got laid off, so there's a lot of candidates on the market, but still really good candidates won't be on the market for very long. So it's important to keep drilling this down. And also hiring managers do make mistakes. TA also make mistakes. Like it's inevitable when you work with TA, someone is going to make a mistake somewhere. But it's important to discuss this and kind of important to discover how we can improve on that if we did something that led to a bad candidate experience. I also think another thing that's not directly related to this question is we often send out candidate surveys, and their candidates often give feedback. And if there are any trends of a lot of candidates having complaints about the specific hiring manager, then it's obviously important to address whatever was stated in the survey. So that's another thing that you can use to help manage hiring managers. The relationship with each hiring manager is quite individual. Hiring managers are quite different from each other, so you have to be able to, I think, adapt and understand their point of view as well, and their struggles as well. Because obviously we want quick feedback, we want very in-depth feedback, but our main job is recruitment. Hiring managers often have other full-time jobs, and recruitment is obviously part of their job, but it's not always. They don't always have as much time as us to like write long scorecards.
Yeah, I like while you're saying all of this, I'm obviously also kind of, brainstorming in my head, like all the experience I had, and I feel like for me, one of the big challenges I have, throughout different environments is I think the alignment also between talent and the hiring teams. And obviously this can be, whether like this can be tech or this can be finance, this can be marketing, whatever area it is. But I think there's actually, you know, a, like a common goal of both sides. Obviously, as you said, this is my full-time job or our full-time job, but it's just part of their job. And sometimes it's difficult to kind of align on those because, we have to be obviously on it to chase the feedback, to arrange the calls, to find the time, and then engage the candidate, engage, the whole experience, and then manage and coordinate the things. And then obviously from the hiring team, it's the same thing, right? Like they have to invest their time and also make the time. So I feel like for me, it's like this alignment, that there is a need and we need to fill that need. And obviously that's my goal, but then also their goal because they have to reach things within their teams as well. And if they lack a skill, then they need to have that ASAP. And then the second biggest challenge, I think, for me is also the fact that there is sometimes this issue between the not the impression, I don't know the word now, but the expectation almost of what should come out of hiring. Do we just hire because we need that skill and we want to fill, or do we think long term, and then what do we do to keep not just to hire someone but then also to keep that person after, right? And then they play so many things a role that you I think have to think of what the salary package is, what the development plans are for this person and all of those, because you can hire but then it's not just about that. It's also about keeping that person in the business, right? To reduce the cost, to grow the business, to reach the goals, and so on. And obviously, it kind of ties back to us then again, because if then someone drops out and there is a high nutrition rate, then you have to come back and work with TA again, and so on. So for me, I think is those two quite a big challenge. What's your take on not just hiring but keeping people also in the business from a TA perspective?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think on your first point, I definitely agree. You have to get buy-in from hiring managers, and hiring is definitely like a team effort or a team sport. Like if just TA is very passionate about hiring, but the hiring managers and the hiring team aren't on board, then it's going to be very difficult. So yeah, you absolutely have to basically have their support and buy-in, and everyone needs to be aligned. And luckily, for the most part, when hiring managers have open roles, it's usually because they kind of lack a skill. So usually you should be able to, I mean, if they're not motivated to hire, you should kind of be able to establish with them why it is important. And it's basically at the end of the day to help them. And if you put it to them that way, that we are actually hiring, we are actually helping you here, trying to hire someone for your team, usually you have their buy-in. So yeah, I think that's a very good first point. And secondly, in terms of the retention rate of candidates, so yeah, this is maybe something that I also thought about mentioning in my first answer, but I think it's once towards the end of the process, when you give them over to HR, usually you don't want the candidate experience to end there. You kind of want to keep in touch with this person. Usually if you're an in-house recruiter, you work at the same company, but we get measured, for instance, on quality of hire. And currently we're just looking at this as someone who passes their probation period, for instance, is a good quality hire. And then along the line, you also want to keep an eye on basically performance reviews and how the candidate is doing within the company. So yeah, basically the tenure of the candidates that you hire is also important. That should be important to TA.
Yeah.
So I think that second point can go two ways. You want to hire people that do well, that we want to keep, and we also need to have an environment that they want to stay in. And I think both of these things combined lead to longer stays within companies. Because I mean, we can have fairly low turnover and a pretty good environment, but if the candidate doesn't have the technical skills, then it's also going to lead to high turnover. So I think it's important to balance, to have a good environment that good people want to work in, and to make sure that you have a good process, so that you kind of identify and hire the good people. And yeah, I think those two things combined will lead to people staying longer. But in general, I think TA should definitely have an eye on how the people that they hire are performing.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's also good feedback for yourself, right? And I think it's also a way of kind of, if you're obviously interested in getting better, to kind of measure the quality that you bring. And obviously you can never fully, you know how someone performs, because there's just so much time that we spend with someone in the beginning. It's difficult obviously to judge, and also you never know how people turn out and how they feel in that environment and all of that. But I do think that the quality of hire is a really crucial data point that TA should look at. Um, in terms of, we were talking about like how to retain, then also I think another big part of a TA's role is to win a candidate over. And I don't think that just only starts when, there is an offer in a conversation, but really from the very first introduction or conversation, where you kind of start selling the company, to a candidate. And I'm not talking about like the salesy sale and, by telling people the, lies or selling the company in the best possible way, because let's be honest, no company is perfect and there's always ups and downs, or good sides and bad sides. But what would you say is one of the things that you experienced that has really helped you win candidates over, for the company that you work for, whether that was in the past or now?
Yeah. So a very good question. And I think this all starts with when I'm looking for a job myself. So usually when I'm applying for jobs, I try and find jobs with at least the engineers. I'm usually doing tech recruitment. So I'm trying to find companies where it's attractive for engineers to work. So ideally you want to work for a company that people want to work for. But yeah, so that's the beginning. But like you said, from the first call, you have to know what is good about the company. A question you often get is, what do you like about working here? So be prepared to answer these types of questions. But also, like you mentioned, don't sugarcoat everything and be honest when someone asks you, what don't you like about working there? The reality is, if you have to lie about any of these things, they are going to find out very, very quickly, and it's going to backfire massively. It's going to be all over Glassdoor, and it's going to be a disaster. So be honest is definitely the first thing. Another thing is, again, TA usually speaks to the candidate quite early on. And they also speak to quite a few hiring managers throughout the process. So if I identify a candidate that I think is really strong and we should really hire, I already, before the hiring manager interviews, I would give them a heads up saying like, this guy is really strong. So if you also have a very good feeling early on in the interview, already try and also kind of sell a bit what it would look like for them in the company, what the potential growth path is, and try and already sell the company in the interviews. And another thing is then also to touch base with the candidate throughout the interview process. And also ask them directly, like, what do you think of us as an employer, and how do we stack up against the other companies you're interviewing for, and just having a clear picture of what's going on in their head, because the reality is we're not going to be able to win every single candidate. Sometimes they are going to choose other companies over us, but at least having a clear picture, you can manage expectations internally of the hiring managers, because you can, if they don't say, you're in the top 2 or something, I'm very confident in saying they're probably not going to accept our offer. So at least you can start managing expectations of hiring managers early on then. But oftentimes you get a very good feeling throughout the process if more selling is needed, where you stand with the candidate. And it all comes down to speaking with them, not just over email, but having a call and actually having a very clear conversation of their thoughts on you. And then also, selling, having as many touch points as possible. I don't want to say selling, but like kind of creating a picture of what it might look like there and why it could be good for them.
For sure. Like, I also think it sometimes can be also like simple things, right? Like where they ask a question and you just don't know. And instead of making something up and coming up with lies, like what I usually do is also I just say, I'm sorry, I really don't know. I don't want to lie to you. you
Yeah.
know, and also, figuring it out afterwards, or just also being just very honest. Like like 99% of people ask literally the same question as you said, like, how do you feel
Yeah.
working there and how's the culture or whatever. And I always say it's really difficult to generalize this, because it can be a good environment for me, but it can be a bad one for you. That
Yeah.
I think is also a bit a give and a take in terms of, okay, how much do you involve yourself into the culture, or how much do you want to be involved in it? So, and it can be a great one for you, but it can be a bad one for me, So I feel like this is really hard to judge for someone else. But I think there's always, like, it's always important to be just transparent. The things that you think that needs, like, have like an opportunity potential within the company, but then also the good things about a place, because obviously we all, you know, have worked in places that were good or bad, but I'm sure there was always something good on it and also something like bad about it. So I think just being transparent with people and just genuine sometimes can also lead to, candidates going for you, because they see like the authenticity. And I think as a recruiter or TA, that's the first door to showcase that, for sure. Um, I have one last question, actually,
Mm-hmm.
because you were saying on, that you have to kind of give heads up to the hiring managers if a candidate is good, and or like if they're not, so, or probably drop out and whatever. Um, how do you think is, like, the influence on us, um, our influence on the hiring managers in terms of challenging them for candidates? I think sometimes what gets a bit missed from a candidate perspective is how much we actually fight for some candidates,
Yeah.
where you see the potential and maybe the hiring manager doesn't because they haven't spoken to. So how do you see that kind of
Um,
action?
well, if I haven't spoken to them, I would highly encourage them to speak to them, but I would
Yeah.
then also kind of tell them beforehand, this is why I thought they were pretty good. But I think it's very important for any good TA should fight for candidates, and I've had many examples of this over the course of my TA career. But basically, a classic example would be they have an interview panel of 4, and maybe one says no, and 3 says yes, or 2 say yes, and another maybe. Then you want to call them all together and kind of fight out, like, why did you say no? Because other
Yeah.
people said this and this, and you often have cases where decisions aren't unanimous, and usually TA is on the side of the candidate. In my experience, I've even had cases where someone got a no in a final, not at my current company, but before at another company I worked for,
Hmm.
and yeah, basically they got a no in the final, but throughout the process they got yeses and strong yeses. So yeah, what I did is you bring in the whole panel that said yes to kind of back you up here.
Yeah.
I will say this, TA just on their own, you kind of can't just go in and fight the battle on your own, but you have to get the
Yeah.
buy-in of also other people that spoke to the candidate that also thought that they were good, and you have to make a case for it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's impossible to make a case if it's unanimously no across the board. There's just no
Yeah.
battle to be won there. But if oftentimes there are battles that you can attempt to win, and some you win, some you lose, but you have to try.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your insights here. I think it's very valuable for people to understand, I guess, how much TA actually does, and and what really happens. Um, Great. So what would be your top tip for TAs to be successful in TA, like when it comes to the candidate experience point?
Yes. So, I'll mention, maybe I can give maybe more than one, but firstly, I think it's important to establish SLAs or rough guidelines for between yourself and hiring managers on feedback, how long it should take. In my opinion, it should not take more than 24 hours to fill out the scorecard. Secondly, make sure that you are streamlined, have your kickoff meeting, make sure the whole interview panel know what they're doing, and that you have the buy-in of the hiring manager as well as the interview team.
Yeah.
And lastly, have a good relationship with HR as well, to make sure at the end of the process, when offers need to be sent, that things run smoothly.
Yeah.
And I would say those are my 3 top tips off the
Great.
top of my head.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Alexander, for being here and for sharing your time. And yeah, all the best to you.
All right. Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
You're welcome. Bye.